Life has a way of delivering its harshest blows when you least expect them. My husband, frustrated by our inability to have children, kicked me out of our home to live with his pregnant mistress, who was 20 years younger than me. But little did he know that he would soon desperately wish to undo his actions. That Friday was meant to be special, my 40th birthday, though I had no idea it would become a day that would change my life forever. Despite the daily responsibilities and constant busyness that had become my life's rhythm, I still managed to maintain a bright smile and the same sparkle in my eyes that I'd had in my youth. My friends often remarked on my youthful spirit and how I could always find joy in life's little moments, no matter the circumstances. This birthday wasn't just another decade marker, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter in my life. Early that morning, I headed to the supermarket with a clear list in my mind. I was determined to celebrate my 40th with a grand dinner surrounded by family and friends, and I knew exactly what I needed. My shopping cart gradually filled with all the essentials: premium cuts of meat for grilling, fresh vegetables, the perfect wine for dinner, and of course, my favorite chocolate cake, the same kind I'd loved since childhood. With each item I added to my cart, I felt my excitement growing as I imagined the evening ahead. I could almost hear the laughter, the conversations, and feel the warm embraces we would share. But as I continued selecting ingredients and making final preparations, I noticed time wasn't on my side. The clock seemed to tick faster and faster as I rushed to get everything ready before my guests arrived. This kind of hurriedness wasn't unusual for me, in fact, it had become a hallmark of my daily life. In both my marriage and household management, I was the epitome of multitasking, juggling multiple responsibilities with what others called admirable skill. I rarely had time to relax, but somehow, in this constant race against time, I never lost my inner optimism or my ability to enjoy life. This energy, this vitality, was what made me special to those around me. Still, I needed to hurry home. While the thought of the celebration brought me joy, I knew I had to rush to make it in time for dinner. Leaving the supermarket, I was lost in my own world and didn't pay attention while crossing the street. That's when it happened. A truck couldn't stop in time and hit my side, throwing me onto the pavement. "Oh my God!" I gasped, trying to catch my breath. Sharp pain shot through my arms and knees as I managed to sit up and look at the truck driver who had rushed to my side. His face showed a mix of anger and concern as he scolded me about my carelessness. Through my fear and pain, I understood he was partly right, even though I couldn't admit it at that moment. "I'll be more careful," was all I could manage to say. After we both confirmed there were no serious injuries, the driver's tone softened, and he apologized for frightening and hurting me, extending his hand in reconciliation. He offered to help gather my scattered groceries from the asphalt. As we picked up items one by one, the initial awkward silence transformed into an unspoken understanding. I nodded gratefully when he offered to drive me home, both of us silently acknowledging our shared responsibility for the accident. I was distracted and crossed without looking, I admitted quietly. "A ride home would be helpful. I'm in a bit of a hurry," I added sincerely, helping to ease the remaining tension. This little mishap wouldn't dampen my celebration spirit. "I'm Steven," he said, opening the passenger door for me. Once in the car, I started giving directions to my house. As we drove, our conversation flowed naturally, as if we'd known each other for years. Steven, turning the corner I'd indicated, asked with genuine interest about my hobbies. I told him about my love for reading and my recent venture into photography, grateful for the pleasant conversation that helped me forget about the accident. He shared that he enjoyed hiking and playing guitar when he had the time. Soon we were deep in conversation about our favorite books, music, hiking spots, and dreams of future travels. This easy dialogue transformed what had started as an awkward encounter into a comfortable journey. After several minutes of warm conversation, Stephen glanced at me. with sincere eyes and said something that caught me off guard. He mentioned how my husband must be happy to have such an intelligent and beautiful woman by his side. I managed a modest smile, appreciating his words while feeling an unexpected flutter in my stomach. That comment led Stephen to open up about his own life, revealing with a slightly choked voice that he hadn't been so fortunate. His wife had abandoned him, and their son Matthew just days after giving birth. His confession left me speechless. When Stephen asked if I had children, I felt my face change involuntarily. The familiar lump formed in my throat as I remembered years of hoping and trying for a child with my husband. I haven't been blessed with that fortune yet, I replied with a forced smile, quickly changing the subject. The moment made it clear I wasn't ready to discuss this with someone I just met minutes ago. By the time I finished speaking, we had arrived at my house. Before Stephen could turn off the engine, I quickly unfastened my seatbelt. Well, here we are. Thank you for the ride, Stephen. This has been an interesting encounter, I said with a polite smile, rushing to open the door. At that moment, Stephen looked at me, sensing my shift in mood. He apologized sincerely for making me uncomfortable with his question about children, insisting he hadn't meant to upset me. His apology surprised me, and I paused briefly. Don't worry about it, Stephen. It's fine. See you around, I responded. I gathered my grocery bags from the back seat and started walking quickly away from the truck. I felt confused by this strange encounter and surprised that a stranger would drive me home. Yet somehow, this stranger had felt oddly familiar. As I walked away, I couldn't help but look back. There was Stephen, still watching to make sure I got in safely. There was something about him that gave me an inexplicable sense of comfort and intrigue. I shook my head, telling myself to stop reading too many romance novels. Seeking a rational explanation, I went inside, quickly unpacked my groceries, and started preparing dinner. While the meat was roasting in the oven, I hurried to take a shower. As warm droplets cascaded down my body, my mind was already organizing the next steps. I thought about choosing the perfect dress for the occasion, applying makeup that would enhance my features while looking natural, and styling my hair to complement the elegant yet simple look I envisioned. Despite the rush, I managed to put together an outfit that exuded quiet confidence and subtle elegance. The meat was slowly cooking, filling the house with an aroma that promised an unforgettable dinner. Every detail of the table had been carefully planned, decorated with candles and a simple but beautiful centerpiece, waiting for the guests to arrive. With the food nearly ready and guests due to arrive soon, I noticed my husband still hadn't come home. I tried to convince myself that his lateness was due to last-minute preparations. I imagined him walking through the door with a bouquet of freesias, chocolates from my favorite shop, or maybe a book by my favorite author, all wrapped with a smile. But as time ticked by, anxiety began to cloud my optimism. Determined to dispel my doubts, I picked up the phone and dialed his number. Only the endless ringing echoed back, feeding the growing unease in my chest. I remembered how he'd been staying late at work more frequently these past few weeks. Even when he did come home, he'd respond to my simple questions about his day with irritation, saying he was tired and wanted to go to bed right after dinner. This cycle repeated daily, building an invisible wall between us, though I tried my best to ignore it. My anxiety about his lateness mingled with a deep sadness about the growing distance in our relationship. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to maintain a positive attitude. After all, I'd grown accustomed to his absence and had learned to live with it. The doorbell rang, and I rushed to check who it was. The screen showed Molly and Joseph, smiling, my closest friends since college days, perhaps my only close friends. Kevin, my husband, didn't like having strangers in our home, believing we should only associate with friends from our younger days. When I opened the door, Molly hugged me tightly, exclaiming how lovely I looked and how I hadn't aged a day. She handed me a box of dark chocolates, telling me to indulge myself a little. Joseph, smiling, presented me with a set of relaxing essential oils, saying they knew I rarely took time for myself. Almost simultaneously, they looked around the house and asked, with knowing expressions, "And Kevin?" Joseph joked that he was probably wrapped up in work as usual. Molly added with a sarcastic smile that the company simply couldn't function without him. I couldn't help but laugh at their words, recognizing the truth in them. "You know how it is," I replied sheepishly, "always some urgent project or meeting, business that can't possibly wait. How do you manage to live like this, always alone?" Molly asked, suggesting it might be time for me to work outside the home and interact with more people. When she asked if I'd ever considered it, I sighed and lowered my eyes, my voice mixing with both love and frustration. Before I could answer, Joseph eagerly interrupted, mentioning that his company was looking for a new salesperson. Molly reminisced about our college days, reminding me how I'd sold graduation trip tickets to everyone, even the reluctant professors. I couldn't help but laugh, remembering how I'd even convinced Professor Gregory, who always claimed he couldn't stand such things. Joseph insisted this proved I was perfect for the job, with my natural talent for connecting with people and sales. I felt grateful for Joseph's job offer, touched that my friends valued my abilities so highly. With a sad smile, I explained that while I'd love to accept, Kevin opposed me working outside the home. I told them how he said his long hours were enough, that if I worked too, we'd have no time together, and I didn't want to burden him with more problems. Molly couldn't contain her anger, even at my birthday gathering. Looking me straight in the eyes, she asked if I knew what she thought. She declared that Kevin was selfish, keeping me locked up at home while he enjoyed his life, and that I was foolish to allow it. Her harsh words surprised me, stirring up a mix of sadness and frustration. Joseph tried to calm the situation, stepping in to remind Molly that this was a day for celebration, not arguments. But Molly wouldn't stop, insisting that someone needed to tell me the truth. "Amber, you're our dear friend, and it hurts us to see you like this," she said passionately. "Stop hiding at home and blaming everything on Kevin. You deserve to be free and happy." I looked at Molly with tears in my eyes, then at Joseph, feeling the weight of their words. I knew they were right, but the situation was more complicated than it appeared on the surface. They understood well the heavy atmosphere that hung in my home. These walls seemed to absorb any joy and reflect it back as awkward silence. I tried to change the subject, directing attention to the prepared table, saying brightly, "Dinner's ready. I've made all the dishes I wanted you to try." Molly and Joseph appreciated my attempt to shift the mood and joined me at the table. The three of us sat down and began to enjoy dinner slowly. From appetizers to dessert, we savored each dish, and the earlier tension gradually melted away. Conversation began to flow naturally, and smiles slowly emerged. After the meal, we shared stories from the past, travel adventures, funny incidents, and even small conflicts that had become amusing anecdotes over time. Laughter filled the room, completely transforming the atmosphere. That's when Kevin walked in through the door with a serious expression. He stared at the table and, though clearly uncomfortable, managed a polite smile. Molly confronted him, saying he could have come earlier, noting how long it had been since they'd seen him, reminding him it was my birthday. Seeing him empty-handed, she asked, "Where's the present for your loving wife?" Kevin made an unpleasant face, but deflected, saying he was happy to see Molly but work wouldn't wait, not even for birthdays. His expression showed he was perfectly content with the situation, without a hint of apology. I sensed the tension and quickly tried to prevent further conflict. Kevin muttered that he hadn't had time to buy flowers, blamed his busy schedule, wished me happy birthday, and pulled a small box from the dresser drawer near the table. I opened it with a sad smile, familiar with this scene. Kevin had never shown interest in understanding my preferences for gifts, always defaulting to jewelry. My 40th birthday was no exception, and any slight hope that this time might be different was crushed when I saw the predictable contents. I lifted the small piece of jewelry and gave him a quick thank you kiss, my expression resigned. In that moment, I couldn't help but remember how my brief conversation with Stephen that morning had been more exciting than the past decade of marriage. The spark and spontaneity Stephen had shown in that short time stood in stark contrast to my monotonous, predictable life with Kevin. I paused, feeling nostalgia tinged with bitterness, then shook my head slightly to clear these thoughts. I tried to rejoin the conversation, but Kevin had barely settled at the table before becoming distracted by endless messages on his smartphone. His attention kept drifting to the screen, creating a tense atmosphere in the room. Molly and Joseph, sensing Kevin's lack of interest and the strained air, decided to leave early. They exchanged goodbyes with forced smiles and awkward hugs. The house fell into deep silence, and I felt that quietness as I had so often recently. Looking around, I realized the only sound breaking the silence was Kevin's message notifications. As I began clearing the dishes and glasses from the table, I watched my husband, wondering why he wouldn't help, why he wouldn't even speak to me. The thought kept repeating in my mind, it's supposed to be a special day, yet he spent it all away from home. I carefully placed each dish in the sink, trying not to disturb the silence. But Kevin remained oblivious to my efforts and feelings, focused entirely on his smartphone screen. Though he was physically present, emotionally he felt worlds away. I took a deep breath, feeling waves of sadness and frustration well up in my chest. I couldn't tell if his indifference was intentional or simply the result of his exhausting daily routine. I wondered when we'd lost our connection, and why my attempts to rebuild our bond were met with such cold dismissal. My mind drifted back to my conversation with Stephen, yearning for the freshness and excitement I'd long forgotten. Finally gathering my courage, I spoke in a quiet voice that carried an inner strength. Even when you're home, it feels like your heart is somewhere else. Kevin seemed startled by my question, and though my unusual tone caught him off guard, he responded coldly, without empathy. Don't start with the drama, Amber. I've still got work to finish, he snapped, barely looking up from his phone as he stood and walked away. I froze, feeling rejection and loneliness wash over me. With an aching heart, I slowly made my way to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and let my tears fall. As I sat there, I felt a twinge in my back, remembering I hadn't even had the chance to tell him about this morning's accident. While I was wallowing in pain and sadness, my phone started ringing. Though the number was unfamiliar, something made me answer after a moment's hesitation. Amber, it's me, Stephen, came his concerned voice. Surprised, I answered through my tears, Stephen? He apologetically explained he was calling late because he just finished reading bedtime stories to his son. I felt myself calming down, filled with gratitude. Thank you for worrying, Stephen. I'm so grateful to hear your voice right now. No need for thanks. I was concerned about you after the accident this morning. Are you okay? Stephen asked. I felt a lump in my throat as I replied, physically, I'm fine. But it's been a really tough day. I'm so sorry, Amber. I wish I could have been there to support you, Stephen said with sincere warmth. I took a deep breath, feeling, for a moment, not completely alone. After a few seconds of silence, I asked, how did you get my number? Stephen chuckled softly, easing the tension. It's actually a funny story. I went back to the supermarket after work and asked about your number. My best friend works there, and when I told him about this morning, he gave it to me. I sighed with relief and gratitude. Thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness. Don't mention it, he said gently. I'm here whenever you need support. We exchanged warm words, and Stephen kindly said, I hope you can get some rest. Call anytime, you have my number now. Thank you, Stephen. Really, thank you, I said as we ended the call. Though I worried about Kevin's reaction to a late-night call, he remained as indifferent as ever. He didn't even notice, and I found myself seriously considering my friend's suggestion about finding work after all these years. The idea of independence through work and regaining control of my life suddenly seemed incredibly appealing. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with the day's events, Stephen's call, the possibility of a new job, and thoughts of reclaiming my independence. Finally, exhaustion overcame anxiety, and I drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I woke up early as usual, but when I rolled over, I noticed Kevin wasn't beside me. Puzzled, I got up and walked to the living room. There he was, lying on the sofa in yesterday's clothes with his suit jacket draped loosely over him. The sight confused me, and I wondered why he'd spend the night on the couch instead of coming to bed, but I decided to let him sleep and take a warm shower instead. After my shower, I returned to the living room feeling slightly clearer-headed. The first thing I saw was Kevin at the dining table, holding a coffee cup and staring blankly at the sky. His demeanor made me uneasy, but I took a deep breath and spoke, Kevin, can we talk? I tried to keep my voice steady as I spoke. Kevin seemed startled by my voice, looking up as if pulled from deep thoughts. What's happening between us? Why did you sleep on the sofa last night? Are you avoiding me? Kevin sighed, looked away momentarily, then met my eyes again. Sit down. We need to talk, he said in a heavy voice. I sat across from Kevin and listened. Before I could finish asking what he wanted to discuss, he cut me off. Amber, I've fallen in love with another woman, and she's pregnant. I felt the ground crumbling beneath me, his words hanging heavy and final in the air. After what felt like an eternity of silence, I finally managed to ask, how long have you been together? Kevin replied coldly, without a hint of remorse, that's not important. His cold words pierced my heart, and while it took me a moment to process what he'd said, my sadness quickly turned to anger. How can you say that's not important? Of course it matters. We've been together for over 10 years, how can you say none of that matters? Through my tears, I whispered, thanks for not ruining my birthday completely. Stop with the dramatics. I want to get this over with, Kevin said coldly, irritation seeping into his voice. Stunned by what was happening, I asked him with a trembling voice, don't my feelings matter at all? Does what I'm feeling right now mean nothing to you? Kevin stared at me, with cold eyes, completely ignoring my pain. What about my feelings? Don't they matter? All my friends have children. But we don't. You've always known how important having children was to me. His words made me feel accused, as if he was blaming me for not being able to get pregnant. My heart twisted with a knot of anger and sadness that felt impossible to untangle. How dare you blame me? I cried out, my voice shaking but determined. I tried just as hard as you did, dreamed just as much as you did. And I've been just as heartbroken about not having children. How can you treat me this way? Stop the act, Amber. Thousands of people get divorced and move on. I'm finally going to have a child. I can finally be happy, Kevin declared. I was speechless at his words, but before I could respond, he walked toward the door without looking back or meeting my eyes. We'll discuss the divorce when I get back tonight, he said as his final words before leaving. I collapsed right there, breaking down in tears of pain and humiliation. I couldn't believe my husband of so many years would abandon me like this. The house felt impossibly empty, and its silence only amplified my suffering.
In stark contrast to Amber's devastation, Kevin felt an unmistakable sense of relief the moment he closed the door behind him. With each step toward the bustling downtown streets, the tension that had built up over years seemed to melt away, reinforcing his conviction in his decision. His thoughts drifted to Rachel, his heart quickening as he contemplated how to share the news that he'd finally told his wife the truth. Now they could embrace their love freely, no more hiding in the shadows. A smile played across his lips as he imagined seeing Rachel, his heart swelling with excitement at the prospect of sharing their news. His mind raced with visions of their future together, happiness finally within his grasp. When Kevin unlocked the door to the apartment he'd rented for Rachel, he was startled to find her frantically packing her clothes. "Kevin, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp with surprise. Flush with the relief of his liberation from Amber, Kevin couldn't comprehend why Rachel was packing. "Are you planning a trip?" he asked with a bemused smile. Rachel's mood was dark, her eyes telling a story of discontent. "Kevin, this isn't what I want. This place is a dump," she declared with cold determination. "We should be moving into your house after kicking Amber out. After all, we're going to be 3 soon." "Rachel, listen," Kevin attempted to placate her. "I told Amber this morning and asked for a divorce, but we can't just throw her out immediately. She needs time to find a new place." Rachel crossed her arms, her eyes blazing with impatience. "I don't care, Kevin. I refuse to live in this shabby apartment while you enjoy your comfortable home. Get rid of Amber now," she demanded icily. Kevin sighed, struggling to contain his frustration. "Rachel, please try to understand. She needs time. It's not fair to put her out on the street with nothing." But Rachel remained unyielding, her voice firm. "I'm not waiting. Make your choice, Kevin. Is it Amber or me?" she pressed, gently caressing her growing belly. Kevin cradled his head in his hands, the weight of Rachel's ultimatum finally sinking in. After a heavy sigh, he surrendered to her demands.
I remained restless, alternating between crying and questioning whether what I was experiencing was real. My heart was trapped in a storm of emotions and thoughts, forcing me to hug myself for comfort. As my eyes wandered around the corners of what had once felt like my safe haven, my phone began to ring. I hesitated but finally answered, only to hear Kevin's irritated voice demanding to know why I hadn't picked up sooner. He curtly informed me he'd found an apartment in the city and that I should move out immediately. I no longer needed to stay in the house. I simply hung up, knowing such important matters couldn't be resolved over the phone. Minutes later, I stood before the mirror, trying desperately to compose myself. "What a coward," I whispered, wiping away tears. I tried to regain my composure, but even happy memories of our marriage brought no peace. I loved this house deeply. It had been my sanctuary, my sacred space. I carefully dried my tears and prepared my usual herbal tea to help calm my nerves. On that chilly evening, I sat on the balcony with my cup, watching the sunset and contemplating my situation. I understood this situation was no longer sustainable. I needed to set aside my emotions and make decisions. Letting go of everything I'd loved would be painful, but I needed to be strong. After months of late nights, Kevin came home early from the office. I was so lost in thought I barely noticed his arrival. He strode toward me with purpose, demanding to know why I'd hung up on him and ignored him all day. He insisted we should end our marriage like adults. I studied his stern expression and serious eyes, realizing he had no intention of prolonging this situation. Trying to maintain my composure, I told him this wasn't the right time to discuss it. I stated firmly that I considered this my home and wouldn't vacate it for his mistress, suggesting at worst we should sell it and split the money. Kevin stepped closer, his voice growing colder as he reminded me the house was in his father's name. I felt anger surge through my entire body. In that moment, everything scattered in my mind came together like puzzle pieces. I realized Kevin had planned this all along. I closed my eyes briefly to contain my anger before finally speaking. I confronted him about his scheme to leave me with nothing, telling him it was predictable, but reminding him that I'd invested everything in this house too. I wouldn't give up easily after years of work and dedication to building our home. Kevin left without a word, slamming the door behind him. I spent that night drowning in pain, surrounded by bitter memories and disappointment as I began packing my belongings. As I packed, I reflected on what had caused our marriage to fail, feeling it was because we couldn't have children. I remembered enduring countless treatments, medications, and injections in our quest to conceive. Early the next morning, I drove to the apartment Kevin had mentioned. My heart raced as I sat in the car for several minutes, gathering my courage. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. I got out of the car and witnessed Kevin emerging hand in hand with a young, beautiful pregnant woman. They carried large suitcases, laughing and embracing each other. As that scene burned into my heart, the truth became crystal clear, crushing me completely. I realized Kevin hadn't really found a new apartment for me. He was trying to push me into the very place where he'd been meeting his mistress. The final piece fell into place, and everything became crystal clear. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself to face this painful reality. With each step I took from the car, my determination showed more clearly on my face. I approached the couple, staring at them intently, and asked Kevin what was going on, my voice mixing grief with anger. Rachel was about 20 years younger than me, beautiful and confident. She could have been Kevin's daughter. When she asked mockingly what I couldn't understand, I informed her coldly that I wasn't speaking to her and that I was still Kevin's lawful wife. I wondered where these young and shallow girls kept coming from. Kevin's voice grew harsh as he defended her, claiming she wasn't just a mistress but the mother of his child. How modern, I laughed bitterly, then told Kevin he was blind to see she clearly had a gold digger written all over her. Kevin frowned in displeasure but remained silent. Rachel dramatically rolled her eyes while caressing her flat belly. When I asked for her name, Kevin quickly intervened to introduce her as Rachel. I shot back that everything made sense now, even her name was a lie, fitting for someone who lived by hiding truth in darkness. I returned to my car with no intention of living in that apartment. Slamming the door, I felt overwhelmed by sadness and anger. I drove aimlessly, trying to find a way to heal the ache in my chest while leaving that surreal scene behind. Suddenly, my phone's ring interrupted my thoughts. I answered without checking who it was, my voice heavy with emotion. It was Stephen, calling with concern in his voice to check if I was okay. Though he was the last person I thought I wanted to hear from, his voice brought unexpected comfort to my wounded heart. Stephen. I managed, my voice trembling. He asked where I was and offered to come get me. I tried to keep my voice steady as I told him I was on Main Street near the park. He firmly told me to wait there, that he'd be right over. I parked my car and watched passers-by, feeling a melancholy at how oblivious they were to my pain. Soon, Stephen's car pulled up beside me. When I got into the passenger seat and saw his face, a wave of relief washed over me. He smiled reassuringly and suggested we go somewhere quiet, mentioning a nice cafe by the river. The drive was short, and we soon arrived at a lovely cafe with a riverside terrace. It was a peaceful space filled with the gentle sound of flowing water and the scent of flowers. We chose a table overlooking the river. Our conversation flowed as naturally as it had during our first meeting, comfortable as old friends. We shared memories and dreams, our laughter brightening each other's faces. In those moments, I forgot my pain, absorbed in the special bond growing between us. Our eyes met frequently, sharing the joy of being there together. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I'd found a lighthouse in the storm. Though I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, Stephen's words gave me new strength. As we sat side by side along the river, I took a deep breath and began to believe this could be the beginning of a new chapter. With the help of my friends Joseph and Molly, I found a beautiful, spacious apartment in a quiet area of town. After Joseph suggested several properties, we found the perfect place, and Molly handled the negotiations to finalize the contract. The apartment had large windows that let in abundant natural light and offered a panoramic view of stunning sunsets each evening. With my new home as a base, time moved forward, and I secured a position with a company that valued my talents and dedication. I threw myself into work, trying to make up for lost time as I rebuilt my life. Though the days were busy and full of responsibilities, I felt a sense of accomplishment with each achievement. My sincere work ethic earned recognition from those around me, and I gradually built my position within the company. I wanted to live life to its fullest, cherishing this opportunity for a fresh start away from the pain. Even with challenges, the support of Joseph and Molly gave me the confidence to move forward. But a special day was approaching that would bring unexpected changes. The next day was February 14th, my wedding anniversary, and it stirred up complicated emotions. I sat on the couch in my spacious living room, with a glass of wine, pulling out an old photo album I'd brought during the move. With each turn of the page, I saw moments of happiness, genuine smiles, and hopes I once thought would last forever. Tears silently rolled down my cheeks as past memories mixed with things that could never return. I allowed myself this moment of weakness, understanding it was part of the process of moving forward despite the pain. Lost in late-night waves of memories, I fell asleep on the sofa, still clutching the album. The next morning, my alarm clock rang several times, but I missed it. The morning sun finally woke me, and panic struck when I saw the time. This was the day of an important meeting I'd been preparing for, and I needed to be at work earlier than usual. This meeting was crucial for my career advancement, a presentation I'd put my heart and soul into. I jumped up quickly, leaving the album open on the sofa as I rushed to the bathroom. My mind racing, I tried to get ready as fast as possible. While dressing, I mentally reviewed the key points for my presentation, knowing everything hinged on this moment. I couldn't be late today of all days. With my heart pounding and worry in my chest, I hurried out of the house. Hoping this would be my one chance at career advancement, I rushed to my car. But my heart sank when I realized the car wouldn't start. I turned the key several times, but the engine only responded with a sickening silence. Not wanting to waste any more time, I called for a taxi. As the morning sun grew stronger, 10 minutes passed with no taxi in sight. Understanding I couldn't wait any longer, I made the decision to walk to work. My heels clicked on the sidewalk as I walked briskly in my black dress. My mind juggled thoughts of the presentation with the ticking clock. That's when I spotted a familiar truck and waved my arms, calling out to Stephen. He finally noticed and pulled over to the curb. I approached, slightly embarrassed and out of breath. I explained between breaths that I needed a ride to work, that it was an important day and I couldn't be late. Stephen smiled warmly and cooperatively, telling me to hop in as he cleared some papers from the passenger seat. I gratefully climbed in, and Stephen immediately started driving. Along the way, I briefly explained why this morning was so important to me. Stephen showed his understanding and increased his speed slightly for my sake. We finally arrived at the office just in time, and I made it to my meeting. The meeting was a huge success, and I secured the contract I'd been hoping for. When it ended, I felt immense relief and gratitude as I quickly pulled out my phone to call Stephen. Stephen, it went incredibly well. I got the contract. I reported excitedly. I wouldn't have made it without you. Thank you so much. I could hear his smile through the phone as he replied that he was glad he could help. He suggested we celebrate with dinner that evening. I immediately accepted, thrilled at the prospect of celebrating this success with him. After hanging up, my heart was full of joy, and I couldn't wait for dinner. I began thinking about what to wear, hoping this dinner would be more than just a celebration of work success, perhaps a chance for Stephen and me to connect more deeply. As night fell, Stephen arrived at my apartment right on time. I came down the stairs feeling especially beautiful in an elegant dress that accentuated my features, wearing a simple but sophisticated necklace. A subtle jasmine-like fragrance surrounded me, sweetly enveloping the air. Stephen seemed overwhelmed when he saw me, his eyes reflecting admiration and deeper emotions. He smiled, extended his hand, and gently told me how wonderful I looked tonight. I took his hand, and we walked to the car together. We headed to a restaurant known for its intimate atmosphere, beautiful setting, and exquisite cuisine. Upon arrival, we were led to a window table overlooking a garden bathed in soft lighting. Just after we sat down, my phone received a message, but after a quick glance, I decided to leave it for later to enjoy my time with Stephen. It's okay, I'll check it later, I smiled to myself, tucking the phone into my bag. Stephen noticed and kindly suggested I check it if it was important. I hesitated but, seeing his sincere expression, decided to look at the message. It was from Kevin, and its contents shocked me. The message explained how Rachel had given birth days ago, but he'd discovered her betrayal. The baby was African American, impossible to be his. He'd taken both a paternity test and fertility test, with devastating results. He was infertile and could never have children. He expressed his desperation, loneliness, and desire to see me again, wondering if we still had a chance. Reading his message stirred up mixed emotions in me. While I sympathized with his pain, anger rose within me at his marriage-time betrayal and deception. It felt like fate had returned to him the same pain he'd caused. This news caught me completely off guard. I looked up to meet Stephen's concerned gaze. It's from Kevin, I said quietly. Rachel had the baby, but it wasn't his. Stephen's expression shifted to surprise and empathy as he took my hand, offering his full support. For the first time in a long while, I felt my heart's wounds beginning to heal. The bond growing between Stephen and me gave me new hope. At the same time, I felt an odd sense of justice and liberation in knowing Kevin had reaped what he'd sown. Each day spent with Stephen gradually healed my broken heart, helping me regain trust and love. I finally overcame the pain of my past and felt ready to embrace new love. As time passed, Stephen and I built a strong relationship based on mutual respect and love. We decided to live together, and with each passing day, I felt increasingly happy and secure. Stephen's son Matthew also became precious to me, and we deepened our bond through shared laughter, play, and special moments together. But fate had an even bigger change in store for me. One morning, while preparing breakfast, I felt unusually tired and realized I'd been feeling sleepy for several days. Stephen, always sensitive to my changes, suggested I see a doctor. During the examination, after asking routine questions, the doctor performed several tests. I expected the usual all-clear result, but when the doctor returned with a warm smile and told me I was pregnant, my world transformed. In that moment, I was overwhelmed with unbelievable joy. After years of suffering and despair, I never imagined this day would come. Stephen, waiting in the reception area, immediately sensed from my expression that something wonderful had happened. I told him the news through tears, and we held each other tightly. We felt a new chapter beginning in our lives, filled with fresh hope and love. I knew then that my past had truly faded away, and a happy life awaited me with Stephen, Matthew, and our future child. I realized The importance of reading life's signs. Every hardship and joy carries meaning, with hidden reasons waiting to be discovered. Perhaps my long struggle with infertility had been fate's way of leading me to Stephen, Matthew, and this baby. What I once thought was a chance meeting with Stephen had actually been the key to opening the door to my new life. I understood that even after 40, it was possible to restart life. Every story contains a universe of emotions waiting to be discovered. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel to stay connected. The story we're showing on screen now is even more moving. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. We'll meet again soon.